Good morning, everyone. My name's Ryan, and I come from the city of Singapore. Now, I'll first like everyone to just recall your first day of school, where you're not quite sure of who to talk to, and you're quite worried that you might have no friends. Remember that feeling of being terrified of not being able to connect with anyone. Now, this feeling of loneliness not only spans after school, not only spans during school, but actually after. Moving into the modern world where we work, this sense of isolation grows even more. In a city which is so rampant with technology and innovation, with technology like social media, with technology like social media and the internet, it should mean that we are more connected. It should mean that we are more connected together. But technology tends to separate us more than we think. So I'm sure that we all know growing popularity of platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Technology that allows us to feel like we're part of a bigger community wherever we go. But yet at the same time, we tend to feel or we tend to separate ourselves from the people directly around us more than we think. So in a sense, we're not really truly living in the physical space around us, with the virtual world being so easily accessible today. Now, I'd like to just share statistics of how people are so indulgent in the social media world today. Where 2 in 3 Singaporeans admit that they are addicted to social media. And people who spend a lot more time on these platforms are at least 2 times more likely to feel socially isolated. To me, the idea of social isolation is not just about being away from people, but it's a sense of loneliness, even in a room full of people. So then I thought, how can architecture and this use of technology can better facilitate this idea of social reconnection for people? And this is where the inspiration of my project comes about. For me, growing up, connecting with my dad has never been easy. Even when I'm in a room with him, we can't really know what to talk to each other about. It's not that we don't have anything in common. It's just that sometimes it's just a bit difficult to talk to one another. But somehow one way or another, whenever we're sitting on the couch in the living room, watching TV together, the conversations just start to flow. We start to talk about our favorite shows, and then we start to talk what's going on in our lives. So then, that got me thinking, what if architecture can be a middle ground for not just people like me, but for the wider community that's around us? So that brings me to my project, which I try to mediate temporalities, where it's about finding the middle ground between people of differences in the cities we live in. As I explore this, I look into the heart of Singapore, an urban melting pot named Tanjong Pagar. The site itself is filled with a diversity of building use, from mature residential estates to intimate shop fronts on one end, and high-rise modern office building blocks and private residential estates on the other. So with these observations, we can start to see distinctions within the site itself, where on one end it's a bit more local, on the other it's a bit more global. And when we start to look at the rituals and the daily practices within the site itself, we can start to see a little bit of a difference in the way people go about in their daily lives. The indulgence of local kopi, also known as coffee, or on the other hand, we have more support for global brands like Starbucks. And as we look into the global side of things, or the business district of things, we start to see people always rushing about, always pending for time, always rushing for lunch, after 5 we're rushing back home. It's always about mobility and time. But when we look at the local side of things, where it's a little bit more of the heartland. We see families converging on the weekends, and then we see old neighbors coming down for a cup of coffee. Interactions are a little bit more intimate, and communities are a bit more intricate. And what lies in between is actually an open green park, where the site is at. But as public as the park may be, with its public events such as National Day celebrations, picnics, and cultural events, the day-to-day realities of it differs very much from its seasonal events, where the space itself is very much uninhabitable, with the lack of shelter, shade, the lack of spaces for rest, and it even serves as a disconnection with the adjacent buildings around it. So my intervention seeks to create a place of meaning and connection in this open green park that threads in between these two very distinct groups of people, and to create a middle ground, as I talked about, mediating temporalities for these two groups of people. So then I realized I needed a form of shelter. So I started to look at the infrastructures that were suitable for my needs, where I could apply a canopy structure and play around with the verticality that comes along with it. And I also then looked at the icons around the site, which is this red cladded tower, where I can start to inject elements from these and start to better create a sense of place. And through my explorations and abstractions, I then compose an architecture together that seeks not to displace, but to enhance the existing public experience. And the intent is to use media and technology to better create a conversation with the public, to create a connecting ground for people of differences. And it is to bring the activities you see on screen to life, where conversations eventually turn into social experiences. So now, let me bring you through how the spaces truly is like, and to get a taste of how community life and the nuances of it is like. The ground level being this common meeting ground, a space for connection, rest, where the verticality of things that is so interconnected, you start to see a more intensity of activities happening in one space. And it is activities like local bands, performances, that draws people together, that starts to create a conversation amongst people, where they share their resonance to such arts and cultural media. And spaces are also curated for debate, conversations, where people start to exchange their opinions, their history, with the things they start to see and resonate with. It is a place for outdoor cultural activities as well. It is also a place that could revitalize old films that was once forgotten. And with the integration and the use of media and technology, we can then start to have a better relationship between the inside and outside, where people start to get a better sensing of what's happening within the architecture. And with a careful blend with existing nature, the wildlife can be admired, while spaces created for local heroes and artists can be celebrated. Therefore, I intend to use architecture as a way to integrate with not just within the site itself, but actually the surrounding. Is to create spaces which are socially centric. Is to create a talking point for the public. And as I curate this array of social activities for a curated journey for the public, I had to consider a few key things as well. And that is to ensure that the shelter and shade I provide is porous enough, not just visually, but to allow the filtration of sunlight within the spaces. And that spaces itself needed to be inclusive, not only limited to the activities that's happening on site, but actually serving as an extension, as a rest point for adjacent buildings. The architecture needed to not just be limited to one kind of social activity, or it needed to have a wider variety of spaces to accommodate for different kind of activities that could possibly happen through the integration of different spaces, different social spaces, space types, outdoor, indoor, different types of scale, small, bigger scale, as well as the different kind of acoustics within the space. So, the architecture seeks to create a meeting ground for people. Maybe it could just be for rest, but at the same time, it is littered with these small activities that becomes a conversation for the people. And it's not only serving as a small meeting ground or intimate meeting ground, but it actually can host large-scale activities. Activities like we all know, such as World Cup, large-scale events where people could cheer for their teams, or even just support their local bands. Lastly, it is to create a space where people can live in the moment, to disconnect from their social devices, and start to live life with true meaningful conversations. To conclude it all, I'd just like to say that I hope that the architecture that I'm bringing on stage today helps to bring the architectural world in the right direction in terms of how we connect with people, especially with people who has once felt disconnected. And for me, growing up in Singapore, connecting with my family has never been easy. But one thing I know for sure is that spaces that allow me to do so means the most to me. And it is that kind of architecture and spaces that I would like to bring into this world. Thank you.